Hello, and welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're wishing a happy birthday to the Law School Toolbox with an episode about what we've learned over the years about entrepreneurship. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, Bar Exam Toolbox, the Catapult Conference, and the Trebuchet Legal Careers site. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're celebrating the 4th birthday of the Law School Toolbox as a business with a special episode on what we've learned as lawyer entrepreneurs over the last few years. So enjoy. So let's start off on a high note. What's the single thing you like best about running a business versus practicing law in a firm setting, Alison? The list is long, I know.
It is long. If I had to pick one though, and I think it's really fundamental, it's the fact that I have control over my own time now in a way that I did not have any control over my own time when I was working at a firm. How about you?
I think that is 100% the same answer for me. I think the beauty of autonomy and I think also just working on the stuff you want to work on, which I guess is autonomy, but working on your own, but also just getting to select how you spend your time is so huge. And for me, I think even more now that I'm a mom, but even before that, just being able to set my own schedule and, see my life as not a standard, FaceTime type of a daily grind has been pretty amazing.
Yeah, like FaceTime has a very different meaning now. When we might be FaceTiming to our business meetings or for our student calls versus sitting in the office, like doing nothing and killing time and having to be there. I think, the one thing I hated most about working in a firm was just this idea that someone else really owned your time. They owned your life. And so I think that is... I don't think most people enjoy that. I think the idea that we can sort of work from anywhere and we can do the sort of work that we want to do. And again, we decide what we work on. And, certainly at this point, I would say it's not as lucrative as a firm job is, but there's a very fair trade-off, which is that you are no longer having someone else own your time.
That's very true. I think the other thing for me that I love about our business, not just to toot our own horn, but I get a lot from having a business partner and building a team and working in a collaborative environment towards a common goal. And I think I got a little bit of that in the law firm, but not in the same way as I feel about our team. I think for me personally, it's just such a pleasant way to work on a regular basis.
Right. And I guess part of that is we get to hire the people that we want to hire.
That's true. And you and I wouldn't have started a business together if we didn't like each other. So...
Right, exactly. So, again, it goes back to autonomy, in a firm setting or really any law setting, you're thrown in with people and it's sort of like sink or swim. Like you have to get along with them. And some of them are great and some of them are not so great. But the reality is, you're kind of stuck with them. Yeah. So it's not a whole lot you can do. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you're like, hey, you know what? This person we thought would be great maybe isn't working out so well. So it's time for everyone to move on to other things. Yeah. So you have that control, even if you have to deal with the fallout of it. Yeah. Well, on that note, let's talk about the maybe not so good aspects.
Or the lessons learned.
We'll do a lessons learned later. But
okay.
What was your biggest surprise that you had about running a business?
This has been the second business I started because I did start on my own just doing law school and bar exam tutoring. And I think, that never grew to the size that our business has grown together. But it constantly surprises me of all the stuff you have to constantly learn, all the hats you have to wear. When it's your own business. I think I knew that on some level, but I don't think you really know it until you are having to do or be all these people, that most companies have like different people who do all these tasks. And for a long time, it was just you and I doing all these tasks.
Yeah, it's funny because that would have been my exact same answer, which is probably why we're good business partners. Just this idea of like, you have no idea what you're doing and you have no choice but to learn it. I mean, I remember for me, even when I was working at the firm, I was thinking maybe I would start I start a law practice or something. And I remember signing up for this online course about freelancing. And I was like, well, I'm not sure I really want to freelance. But, a lot of it was about marketing and selling and, how to like position yourself as a product and all this. And I was like, I don't know anything about this, but it sounds like stuff I'm really going to need to know if I want to run a business. But you've got to learn everything. Like I have I'm looking at my bookshelf now and I have books about accounting and forming a limited liability company and working for yourself and marketing and selling and, Seth Godin's everywhere and, all this stuff. Right. Like, there's a lot of stuff that I think you have to be interested in, or at least willing to do.
Mm-hmm. I also think one of the things that is interesting about, either having your own company or your own practice is it's also a very personal reflection of you.
Mm-hmm.
You go to an office job and, maybe even you do take your job seriously, but it's still, I don't know, it's somebody else's kind of identity or you're working for somebody else. It's very different, I think, too. And the lines become very blurred when you kind of take on this role that the success of the business is very personal to you,
Right. And it's weird. It's weird because we live in this very social media oriented environment. I remember, when I started the Girls Guide to Law School, which was my first website, which frankly never really was a business.
Right.
But, I had, some very minimal about page that hidden deeply on the site. And this friend of mine from law school was like, this needs to be on the front page. I'm like, but it's not about me. He's like, it kind of is about you, and you realize that you are you cease to be on some level like an actual person and become like brand you.
Right.
And I know a lot of people kind of hate that idea and they think it's so like, oh, I don't want to deal with it. But the reality is like, you are the face of your business.
Yeah.
And if you're not comfortable with that, you probably shouldn't be running the business.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a weird thing to have to get comfortable with about like, people have some impression of like the Girls Guide to Law School girl. And I'm like, that's kind of me, but not entirely,
Right. Right. And then getting comfortable connecting with people kind of based on that brand. I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast, the fact that we met on Twitter.
Right. So why don't we tell that story?
No, we should tell that story. So many moons ago, like 4.5 years ago, it was like some September day or something like that.
I remember it was really warm.
It was very warm in San Francisco, but after some Twitter direct messages that were exchanged because we were both writing something. I think it was on like law school study groups or something.
Yeah, I think you like sent me a link and you're like, oh, you might be interested in this because you've written something similar. And I was like, oh, this girl seems smart. And I was like, oh, she's in San Francisco. And at that point, like I was basically talking to anyone who would speak to me. Because I was like alone in my house, like sending this stuff out onto the internet. So I was like, oh, maybe we should go for coffee. And I think you were kind of doing the same thing, except you had real live students.
I did. But it was the same thing. And I just decided that I was really going to kind of go gung-ho and try and, build my business at the time. And so I think we ended up realizing we lived less than a mile from each other.
Exactly.
And so we both really like coffee. So we went and had coffee. And then I think I decided to write some guest posts for the Girls Guide to Law School. I think that's the first kind of project we did together.
Yeah, which are still wildly popular.
Yeah. So and then from there, we became friends. We talked more about, stuff that interested us. And then I think it was around December of that year, you came to me with the idea of some online courses for law students.
Right. Well, I think we literally, it had been a couple of months since our coffee date. And I was like, oh, why don't we go to lunch? And by the end of lunch, we had basically decided to go into business together.
Yeah. I actually remember going home to my husband and being like, I think Alison and I might start a business. And he was like, what? What?
Yeah, it's kind of like an arranged marriage that you just got really lucky and it worked out.
Exactly.
So the stars definitely aligned on that one.
They did. But I think it is interesting because what a powerful lesson that was for me is if I hadn't have put myself out there, if I hadn't started writing and kind of creating this kind of public persona, I would never have met you. And then this business would have never existed.
No. And I think there's some value in like understanding serendipity too, part of sometimes people, particularly lawyers, turn to entrepreneurs. They want to control sort of every aspect of things and, have like spreadsheets of how they're going to do this and that. And that's great. But ultimately, you might just run into your new business partner on Twitter. And I think being open to that, and it's not just your business partner, there are lots of, we have a lot of sort of professional friends that we met through Twitter or other social media or at conferences or whatever. And just, being open to that serendipity, I think, is a really key character trait for someone who's going to be happy being an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. And I think building that community is also one of the ways you stay sane as being an entrepreneur, is you talk to other entrepreneurs who are struggling with the same thing and learn from each other.
Yeah, particularly in the beginning. I mean, I feel like we kind of started this it was the middle of the recession. So it was almost like a golden spring for, entrepreneurs, because everyone's like, well, everything's imploding anyway, so I may as well just like try to start something new. And there was, it was kind of I think social media was different then too. It was like more about actual relationships. I mean, now, let's face it, we all just send a bunch of content out on Buffer and like other bots read it and pick it up. And like, it's not so much real people there anymore.
Right.
But like back in the day, if you were like on Twitter for a little while every day, like you actually met people and you'd have conversations, and then you'd meet them in person for coffee, or, you finally meet them at an event. And I think that sort of community aspect, particularly, in the early days when it's like just kind of you and your partner, or, you don't have a lot of people to talk to.
It's very true. Yeah. And I think, we would have these little meetings with a couple of our entrepreneur friends who nobody was local, but to just talk to other people who are kind of going through the same thing, because it can be kind of lonely.
Yeah, and we'd be Skyping, with people around the world, like, hey, and like it's useful. I mean, you can call it a mastermind or whatever you want. I don't think you have to get that fancy, but the reality is lots of people who are kind of at the same place are struggling with some of the same things, and you can trade ideas. I mean, and people have different expertise. I was a programmer before I went to law school, which turns out to be extremely useful skill set for running an internet business.
Yes.
But, other friends of ours who did not have that sort of background, like I was very willing if they were having a problem with their developer, because let me tell you, the developers will take advantage of you if they think they can. And unfortunately, with most lawyers, they can. I was willing to step in and be like, look, this is like bull crap, basically. Like your developer's taking advantage of you. And like, I'll send them an email, or, you ghostwrite an email to you basically being like, I'm not going to put up with this.
Yeah.
And, other people have different expertise. Like someone might know about marketing or sales, or, I was at my ski cabin talking about Facebook ads the other day with someone who's in a totally unrelated area, but is running Facebook ads.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's you just really have to open yourself up and get creative about how you're connecting with people and where you're getting information, because it can be exciting, but it can also be challenging, because you do have to put yourself out there and talk about what you do and meet people and create a community that you can learn from.
Right. And it's also about who you trust. You have to pretty quickly figure out who you're not going to have these conversations with.
True.
And I mean, that's the other side of having a community is typically it's a pretty small community and word spreads, Yeah. You don't want to be the one who's being a jerk to everyone, because eventually you're going to need that favor.
Yeah.
And, I think it's just generally, if you want to start a business, it's better to be friendly with people, even if they sort of seem to be competitors of yours. I mean, we got that a lot, particularly sort of in the early days about like, oh, I can't believe you talked to that person. Like, aren't they competing with you? And it's like, well, A, they're not directly competing necessarily. Like they happen to be in the same space. And B, even if they are sort of a competitor, I would still rather have someone be deciding, between A or B than thinking about like, oh, does this service even exist? Like,
right.
Right. So, I think people have different viewpoints. My personal viewpoint is, make it a win-win-win and just make the pot bigger for everyone.
Yep.
But some people obviously are very, very competitive and they don't want to play game. They don't want to play ball with anyone who might be potentially a competitor. And that's fine, but I don't talk to those people anymore.
It's so true.
And like ultimately if they come to me for a favor, I'm probably not going to be that inclined to do it. I mean, maybe that's vindictive, but
yeah. I think back to that lunch where we decided to start a business together, and I guess if you told me, 4 years, then that in 4 years we would, be running a business with a team of, many different people some of whom, we basically create their full-time jobs. And
there's not a basically there.
Okay, there's not a basically. We do create full-time jobs for people, that we...
And they're doing pretty well.
Yes, and they're doing pretty well. If you would like to come work for us, send us an email. But, and that we, I see some of the money coming in and going like, wow, this is actually a real business. And I kind of wonder if you told me 4 years ago that our little idea of doing some online courses, which is just now a small part of, or it's just part of our business, it's not a small part, but would have turned into what it is today. I don't know if I would have really believed you. I think kind of a challenge of being an entrepreneur is sometimes I think you also have to be able to change your idea of what the being is becoming, because you're not really sure sometimes where it's going to go. At times, I feel like this business is somewhat taken on a life of itself, and we're just, helping it along.
Yeah, and I think, we have a famous story that we've told a lot of people about the early days of, the Law School Toolbox, where we had our online course and we're selling it for like, $20-something a month. And we were like, oh, this is going to be so great. We're just going to sit back. It's all like, you read all the stuff on the internet, like passive income. Like, oh, this is going to be great. Like, we're just going to we're going to launch this course. Look at all the, whatever, 40,000 new law students every year. Like, surely like 10% of those people want it, right? They'll sign up in no time.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, that doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
No. It does not happen.
Yeah.
And, so we were kind of at this low point, in the first year or so. And then I remember we were like, what are we doing? Like, we've left these firm jobs. Like, nobody wants to buy what we're selling. We have a couple $100s a month and like recurring revenue. This whole like passive income thing is really not happening. And we have to keep updating this site like all the time, because otherwise why would anyone stay members? Like, this whole thing seems like a terrible idea.
Yeah.
And I talked to this friend of mine who's a serial entrepreneur and was just like, what do we do? And he sort of said, well, tell me where the money comes from. And I told him, and he's like, okay, you're not in the business you think you're in. Yeah. I was like, what? So it's this moment of like, you might not actually be able to sell what you think you're going to sell. And I think, in Silicon Valley terms, it's the pivot. Mm-hmm. We know it works for like lawyers too. If you're opening a solo practice or something and you find that, bankruptcy is sort of a classic example of this. And we're like, oh, it's so great. I want to do bankruptcy laws. Like, those people have no money. Like, by definition, they don't have money. Right. So how are you going to get them to pay you?
Right.
And it's not saying it's impossible, but, it's like you might get into this and then realize like, hey, you know what? People who want to do estate planning actually have a lot more money. Maybe those are better people to work for.
Right.
And you have to be open to these ideas about like people, the market telling you that this is not actually what we are going to buy.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And then it can take some time to get to learn your marketplace and to also create brand awareness, and
absolutely.
And to find your audience, I think.
Well, and everything, this is another lesson learned, is everything's harder and takes longer than you think it will.
Oh, yeah. Like 3 times as long.
Yeah. The when I was in architecture school, the joke was, basically figure out for your client, like how long you realistically think it's going to take you to do their project and then double or triple it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably right. I think that's, if there's one thing, well, I guess I was going to say the one thing, if there are two things that cause people to fail basically as entrepreneurs, I think one is just not realizing how difficult everything is.
Yeah.
And that they have to have like the runway and the time and the money to continue chipping away at it. And it's probably going to take years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I forgot what the other thing was. Oh, no, the other thing was debt.
Yeah.
We can talk about that. But, if you're investing a ton of money, that's going to be a problem much sooner than in a business which we basically have had cash flow more or less from the beginning. So,
Right. And you're the one who turned me on to the Chris Guillebeau kind of philosophy of the $100 startup, and the idea that you really try and do things as bare bones as possible. So you're not saddled with a lot of debt, because it can be very crippling. And I think it can be so attractive when you're excited about a new project to pay a developer to build some super fancy website, or to invest in a lot of equipment, or to really invest all this capital into it. But what if you're
starting a law practice, like get a fancy office.
Right.
It's like, don't do that.
No, don't do that until you can pay for the fancy office.
I know that obviously there are exceptions. If you're doing like criminal defense work, you probably want an office, stuff like that. But like, the average person starting a business does not need an office.
Not anymore. The world is just a totally different place. So I think that is interesting. And it's interesting if you're thinking about starting your own business to read about these kind of different philosophies, because I really didn't know much about the kind of bootstrapping model, I guess, of starting a business. And after reading some books that you turned me onto, I think I really agreed that this was the right model to do it. And then you're taking at least the money you're making and reinvesting in the business instead of just sinking more and more capital into it without knowing that it is at least producing some income.
Yeah, exactly. And I think The 4-Hour Workweek is another great book. I mean, obviously Tim Ferriss is a total workaholic. He does not work 4 hours a week. But I think the basic concepts are useful about, how you do things on a shoestring and get things like a minimum product out in the marketplace and see if people want to buy it.
Yeah.
And what we've learned is that maybe they don't want to buy it in exactly the format you're offering it in, but maybe you could repackage it and make it look more appealing, and they'll actually pay you a lot more for the same thing.
Yeah.
Because one other thing we've learned, pricing is a dark art.
That is for sure.
And I don't think anyone, I don't care who you are or what your training or background or resources are, no one really knows about pricing until you put something out there and see if people buy it.
That's true.
And it really pays to learn about how people think about this sort of thing. So there's a great book called Influence by this guy, Robert Cialdini, I think his name is. But it really talks about all these crazy ways that people think about pricing. And, you and I have this conversation sometimes where we're like, I just feel like that number sounds more expensive. And it sounds crazy. Of course, numbers are numbers. They are what they are. But there are certain numbers that sound more expensive than other numbers that are actually higher.
Yeah. I know.
I mean, that's crazy. These are the things you learn in a business.
Yeah. It's so true. I think another interesting thing that has happened over the last 4 years is we've had some points. We were talking about serendipity in a few minutes ago, but that life has kind of forced us to take these leap forwards that have actually been really good for the business.
Right.
Things that you wouldn't necessarily think would be good for the business. And the first one was you slicing your finger open.
Yeah. So, we were maybe 2 years in. I think
we were 2 years old. Yep.
Yeah. And I think it was because we hadn't taken a vacation at all for 2 years and decided that we needed a vacation. And so I went on this amazing trip to Turkey, Georgia, Armenia, and I came back and I was super jet lagged. And I was trying to cut this Turkish delight, which is nougat candy that had been in the refrigerator, and managed to stab my finger with a butter knife and sever my tendon.
Terrible.
Which is not really ideal.
No, it's awful.
And I couldn't type for 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
I had to dictate everything. I was in a brace. I was in a cast.
You had surgery.
I had surgery, physical therapy on my pinky finger.
Acupuncture. You did it all.
Yeah, I did everything. Nothing was working, and my finger still doesn't really work. But no, but ironically, I think that was the first time that really forced us to transition from, and this is actually a useful concept of having sort of created jobs for ourselves to creating a real business. And I don't remember who it was that told me about this, but I think this applies a lot for particularly lawyers who think they want to go out and practice on their own. It's what's your goal? Is your goal to create a steady job that you do and you just happen to be your own boss? Or is your job to create a business, where you're employing other people and things like that? And, either one of those is fine, but they're really different.
Yes. And I think when we started to build a team, and around that time, we'd actually hired kind of our first part-time team member, and which was amazing because when Alison couldn't type, it really did cripple the team.
Yeah. Yes, when half your team actually can't interact with the computer, you kind of have to have someone else as an assistant to do things publish your posts.
Right, exactly.
Write your emails.
It did also, though, make us take a hard look at what we could give to somebody else. What were the tasks, for instance, that Alison was doing that she didn't need to do? What did she actually have to do versus what she didn't have to do? And then we had another opportunity for that to come up when I got pregnant to do the same thing. It was what does Lee have to do? What does Lee not have to do? And I think, these were great opportunities for us to start shifting the business and saying, okay, well, if we can free up some of, the founder time, the high level time to be able to think, strategically and do things to expand the business, we can, offload some of these responsibilities, then we really can grow. But without, strategically being able to do that, we cannot grow because there's just not enough hours in the day to do that. And so, as much as a lot of people would see stabbing your finger and deciding to start a family as possibly being two things that aren't good for business. I think in the end, they actually both of those situations, which were about a year apart, actually, which is kind of funny, helped us take leaps forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's about processes. You realize, like, do we have the right documentation in place? Can things be handed off to someone? If we wanted to hire someone, are we able to tell them what to do? Like, and it's the inevitable, like if one of my people gets hit by a bus, like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And, in the beginning, you're doing everything, or you and I are doing everything. And so we kind of know, and we're feeling like comfortable, like, oh yeah, I know what's going on. But even there, like, if you have two people, half the time, I wouldn't know what you were doing.
Right, exactly.
Like, you wouldn't know, like, how to run the back end of the website.
No, not.
So, I think even in the beginning, when you're doing everything, it still is really valuable to have processes and documentation. Obviously it's hard because you're doing all this stuff, and the last thing you want to do is like spend time writing down what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But I think in the long run, it just makes everything so much more valuable.
Yeah.
And if you're ever thinking about like selling your business, that's what someone buys.
Right.
Is like your process, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Like your products and your process of how things are run.
Yeah.
I think another thing that we've had to learn is really not saying yes to everything. I think that's been a hard lesson for you and I to learn.
It is, because we're very enthusiastic. Yes. And I think we both like the shiny new objects. Yes. And we're like, oh yes, we could let's start a conference, like on the spur of the moment, and throw a conference like 3 weeks or like, no, what was it, like 3 months after we had the idea? That was insanity.
It was insanity.
And then to do it again the next year.
Right.
We're just like,
also insanity.
But, at the same time, I think that was a really great experience, and we loved doing it. But that's an example, I think, of where eventually we just had to look realistically at it and say, you know what, this doesn't actually make that much sense from a business perspective.
Yeah, and we've gone back to that lesson that your friend, the serial entrepreneur, gave you of, where's your income coming from? What are you really running here? What is this business kind of becoming? And then focusing on growing the things that are working and trimming the things that are not, because we found we were spending a lot of our time on things that were not necessarily moving the business forward.
Yeah. And I think, one of the questions as a founder, you have to be constantly asking yourself at a certain point, once you have, the ability to hire and things like that, is like, can we outsource this? But that's kind of a micro level question. Mm-hmm. The macro level question is really like, what can only you do? And I think it's Ramit Sethi is like, there should be no more than 3 items on that list. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you actually need to be doing to build and grow your business versus like, what is all the stuff that you're spending your time on?
Right.
And I think that's really hard because, it's always this balance of like, well, we don't want to waste money and like, maybe it's going to be expensive to pay someone else to do this. But, if I can spend a few $1,000s like on a new website or a few $100s on like advertising and that generates tons of new revenue, that's a good investment.
Right, exactly. And I think when we have expanded our team, that we have also really gotten a lot of really interesting viewpoints. And it has brought to us like ideas about how to grow the business. We just had a business call this morning with someone on our team about how to streamline and some processes and possibly purchase some new tools to help, manage some of our online products and streamline record keeping and take out some manual tasks. And, she's so good at seeing the world that way. And that's just not really how we see the world. So if she hadn't been on our team, we would still be scratching our head going like, how can we manage this gigantic spreadsheet that, contains all sorts of information for us? So you can learn so much by bringing people on and giving them responsibilities and having them even share with you ways to better the business.
Right, which ironically I think is one of the things that lawyers tend to be not so great at. In what other kind of professional environment or any environment divides the world into lawyers and not lawyers. So there tends to the stereotype, which I think is sometimes true, is that it tends to be this lack of respect for other people's knowledge and other people's perspectives. But I think as an entrepreneur, like, you have to get over that.
Yeah,
for sure. You actually don't know everything. You cannot know everything, even if you are constantly learning, which you need to be doing. And at some point, you basically have to trust other people.
You do, I mean, am I the best person to like do all of our bookkeeping and accounting?
No.
No, I am not. Like for many reasons. One of which is I'm not an incredibly good bookkeeper and accountant.
The first like year or two you did do it because you're better than me.
Right. But then it's like we didn't have, the kind of critical mass where it's like enough to outsource and pay somebody else to do it, of course, and then it's like you get to a certain point where I think I just emailed you and I was like, this is out of my control at this point.
And I was like, absolutely, we need a bookkeeper.
Yeah. So, you do have to be honest with yourself when those points come up where you do need to bring in support. That's the only way to move things forward. But
you also have to be careful. I mean, I know a lot of people fall prey to this sort of like SEO consultants because that's, that's people are like, oh, it's so complicated. That's such a black box. I need these people who are I'm going to pay them thousands of dollars, but they're going to get me a top Google ranking. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, I can tell you right now, let me share the secret of SEO with you. I can tell you how to get on the first page of Google. Produce a lot of very high quality content and do it a long time and do it regularly.
Right.
That's it. It's not any more complicated.
No.
Is it easy? No. Is it complicated? No.
I still remember one time a prospective bar student getting on a phone call with me and saying, so I Googled, I failed the California bar and your name was all over the first Google page. How did you do that? I was like, I guess we're just that good. I don't know. What do you say when somebody asks you that?
No, I mean, that's a good take. Like I found out early on with the Girls Guide, like SEO really works. Yeah. I launched the site and granted, I'd done a lot of search engine optimization because I used to be a programmer and conveniently had worked on some related stuff at a law firm. But, basically I was sort of like, oh, I don't really know if this is going to work or not. So I launched the site and then I go away on vacation to off the grid in rural Mexico. And a few days later, I come to an internet cafe and people have emailed me their whole life story because they found the series I did on judicial clerkships and they want advice. And it was this moment of like, oh my God, this really works.
Yep.
So I didn't have to pay someone thousands of dollars. I just produced a lot of like really targeted high quality content.
Yeah. So the stuff I think especially with the technology stuff, people really feel like it is beyond their reach. And I think that for most people, if you're comfortable with exploring and learning technology, it is not beyond your reach. But it is so easy to get kind of sucked into this idea that you have to outsource every single technology thing that you do. Because I think in the beginning, for most people, that's just not true.
No, it's not that true. And the reality is a lot of it's pretty easy at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty cheap. I mean, basically, if someone would like to know how we run our business, I'll tell you. We have Google Apps running our email. We have WordPress running all of our websites. We have some special plugins, that do certain things. But what else? We use Dropbox. We use Trello. Trello's our favorite. These are all distributed solutions, some of which are free.
Mm-hmm.
We use Google Documents for certain things. Like, we're not really spending money on most of this stuff. MailChimp. Right. Like, MailChimp's what, $10, $20 a month? I mean,
yep.
None of this stuff is that complicated. It's like anyone can learn how to use MailChimp.
Right.
Like, it's not that hard.
Right. You just have to be open and willing to figure it out. And I think that that's kind of the key thing. And just if you consider doing this sort of an alternative path, whether it be, a solo practice or whatever, just be comfortable with the fact that you will always be challenged and learning outside of whatever the task of your business is,
Right. And I think that's really the difference between is something to think about is, do you want to actually do the work yourself? Mm-hmm. In which case you're basically creating a job for yourself and that's not a problem. Or do you want other people to do the work and do you want to run a business? That's
right.
A very different mindset.
Absolutely. I think another thing that, I think you and I were of one mind on this, but it's important to think about how this business is going to fit in with your lifestyle and what you want to offer, and we were really passionate about starting a virtual business, being able to work from multiple locations, being able to have people who work for us work from multiple locations. And, we've been able to do that, but we had to make some very strategic decisions. Like if you have ever looked into our law school tutoring, it is only done by Skype. It's not available any other way. So,
and sometimes students are like, I want someone in person. We're like, great, good luck finding that. You're not the right client for us.
Exactly. So,
and I think that's one of the key things is ultimately as an entrepreneur, you get to decide how to run your business. And that can be very empowering because you get to decide how you're going to treat people. You don't have to run it as this sort of like zero sum game where like everybody's going to be scared all the time. And, you get to decide like how people who work for you are going to, how you're going to relate to them, how you're going to relate to the people who pay you money. If somebody's having some crisis and, they drop out of school and your refund policy says that, oh, they shouldn't necessarily get a refund. Like, you get to decide how to handle that.
So I think another interesting element of what we have done is the fact that we are a woman-owned business.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! And I think that this can be, a good thing, but also a bit of a challenge. And I think it's been interesting along this road about some of the feedback we've gotten for being a woman-owned business as well. People ask us all sorts of crazy questions sometimes, but, I don't know. How do you feel about running a women-owned business?
Well, I think we're running a business and we happen to be women.
Very true, yes.
But no, people have said and continue to say all kinds of really crazy things that honestly I don't think they would say to two men who are running a business.
I think that's true.
But let them. Like, what do I care?
Yeah.
I'm happy to have someone completely underestimate us. And if they want to be condescending, they can be as condescending as they want to be. And then as usually it works, like, a year later, they're coming to us looking for a favor because suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, you're everywhere.
How does that happen?
Oh, how did that happen? And you're like, you know what? I remember that conversation we had last year.
Yeah.
Not to say I'm not going to help you.
Right.
I'm probably not going to help you very much.
Yeah. I also think it was interesting when I did get pregnant, and we talk about this in one of our other podcast episodes, that people were, acting like they were worried that you were going to be mad at me for getting pregnant, or it was going to, what was going to happen to the business. And I remember telling someone, if two women who are running a women-owned business can't figure out how to have one of the women have a child, then we have some major problems.
Yeah, totally.
Because we spend a lot of time talking about how the world needs to, make space for women to make personal choices in their lives. If we can't model that behavior, we're in trouble. So.
Yeah. And, a lot of it just comes down to from working in a firm, like a lot of the time you spend there's frankly wasted.
Yeah.
And I love people who are like, oh, is this what you do full time? And like, yes. Like, oh, really? Yes. Moving on.
Yeah.
It's just like, seriously, like, come on.
Yeah, I know. It is so weird.
Well, it's so funny because like one of our heroes, who I think we talked about the first time we ever met, is Meg Keene from A Practical Wedding. And that site is fantastic and we love her. And part of what we love is, she talks about these things about running. Hers is a little different because it's very female focused business. She runs a wedding site. And our business is not. I have the Girls Guide to Law School, but I think we were very conscious with the Toolbox sites about like not targeting them so much towards women. But, she talks a lot about just like the crazy condescending things that people say. And she just wants to look at them and be like, I make more than my lawyer husband.
Right. So.
Like, come on. This is like, yes, it's like fluffy and pink, but there's a lot of strategy and I'm not an idiot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you are a woman planning on going out and, starting a woman-owned business, I think it's just, you got to remember that you're going to have to roll with some crazy punches. But
at the same time, I think it's also an advantage because other women are doing the same thing, and those people are looking for allies, and they're willing to be your friends. And not to say that like guys are not willing to help you. We've had some excellent male supporters. Cleo, for example. They've always been very supportive. Love Jack Newton. Love all those guys. But ultimately, when we had our mastermind calls, it tended to be all women.
Yeah. So, women in the best of circumstances help other women, and that can be an amazing thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to get comfortable about the money aspects. I know, and about just the control aspects. I think for both of us in the beginning, if we were at a cocktail party and someone asked us what we do, we weren't comfortable saying, I run a business or I'm an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. I used to give this horrible answer that was along the lines of, well, I used to be a lawyer, but it's like, oh God, So we had to get very conscious, and we actually practiced sort of with each other. Like, what is our elevator pitch when people ask us what we do?
I know, it's interesting. I was just rewriting a bio for an event I'm speaking at next month. And I used to have such a hard time writing that bio. I was thinking about it because I'd actually spoke at this event 2 years before, and I went in my email and found the bio. And I remember writing the bio even just 2 years ago and being like, wow, it was so hard. How do I make myself sound impressive? And even just selling myself and what I do. And then this time it was just like, oh, here's my bio. This is what I do. Yeah. I'll see you at this conference. People will want to talk to me. It's just, I don't know. It's just funny because you do have to get very comfortable with going back to an idea we talked about earlier, this kind of brand starting at this, starting to market yourself and be this persona and then have confidence behind it.
Well, then there's that balance because you don't want to like annoy all of your friends on Facebook by being completely self-promotional in every post. You have to find, back to our authenticity episode. You have to find something that feels authentic to you.
Exactly.
And, we both struggled saying we were entrepreneurs in the beginning, but now I love it. I'm like, yes, I run a business. This is what I do. Yep. And people, it's all in the way that you say it.
It is. I used to call myself a reluctant entrepreneur, and I haven't used that terminology in probably 2 or 3 years.
Well, I think because you got called out on it.
I did get called out on it. But also, I don't feel that way anymore. Because right. I do feel that I'm very proud of what we built, and I think we add a lot of value. And I think once you feel that way about what you do, it's just very easy to be able to promote it in what you do with confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, on the other hand, being an entrepreneur is definitely not the right move for everyone. Yeah. There are other ways you can be sort of semi-entrepreneurial. You can work freelance for someone like us, for example.
Yes.
Always looking for great tutors.
Great tutors, yes.
There are ways to dip a toe in if you're not sure. You can work on the side. You can pick up the occasional freelance job. I don't think it's the media sort of sells as like entrepreneurship is the answer to all of your problems. And we're here to tell you it's not. It's actually really hard. And it's definitely not the right solution for everyone.
And that's okay. But yeah. I think it's definitely, I think the side hustle is what we often call it, is a great way to decide if you like this type of work, whether it be the very virtual work that we do or just, freelancing for someone else, or just figuring out if you like that lifestyle, if you like working by yourself on your laptop. Not everybody likes that.
Yeah, you have to be pretty okay with being alone a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And some people would rather go to the office, and that's totally great.
Yeah. So I think when we look back 4 years ago, it was a very different animal that we launched. I remember opening our first bank account together.
I remember when our first customer tried to pay us, and PayPal would not take the money because they were in Canada. And I literally sat down and cried and was just like, what have we done? But again, that was a good lesson because when we, a few months later, launched a bigger project, we did not use PayPal as our payment processor. And that, I will say, is one of the best decisions we ever made.
Well, sometimes when I think about those early days 4 years ago, I am really amazed at what it's become, and the fact that now we have to have multiple team meeting calls because they got too big, which is
it's true. I remember when we got our first actual payment, because the girl in Canada, after I finally sorted out that she could pay some other way, decided not to buy. Not that I'm still angry about that. But I remember sitting in the coffee shop, and I was talking to my boyfriend at the time who was running a business. And I was like, I don't think this is going to work. We had this one person 3 days ago who wanted to buy, and she couldn't buy, and nobody else is interested. And whoa, And I got this email in this conversation from, our payment processor being like, you've sold something. And I think it was $200. And I was just there was this moment of oh my God, this might actually work. A stranger just paid me money. And I don't think you forget that.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Those early, I still get excited when somebody buys something and I get a notification, but in the beginning, every single one had so much meaning.
Yeah, that first was just oh my God, someone actually bought this. We're running a business. We just sold something.
Exactly.
I never felt that way about winning summary judgment motion. So
no.
I figured I was in the right business when I got that one.
Exactly. Well, we hope that maybe you've learned some valuable lessons while listening to us jabber on about what we've learned over the last 4 years. I'm kind of excited to see what we're going to do over the next 4 years. Who knows?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing if you think about what we couldn't have predicted 4 years ago. Yeah, who knows in 2020, which is crazy.
What? I know. Hopefully we'll still be podcasting. That would be fun. We like
exactly.
Podcasting. Thank you for listening. We really have a good time. So.
And speaking of time, with that, we are out of time.
We are out of time.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a second to leave a review and a rating on iTunes, because we'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Typically, we have new episodes coming out every Monday. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee and Alison at Lee@Law School Toolbox or Alison@LawSchoolToolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at LawSchoolToolbox.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon.